Well, welcome everybody to our industry-focused session at Outperform 2020. This is really focused around the manufacturing industries, and the title is Accelerating the Move to Digital. I'm very excited and honoured to have an international set of panel of experts from all walks of manufacturing. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel, and maybe we could go first. Paul, if you could introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, I'm Paul Benson. I'm General Manager of Optimisation at Fonterra Cooperative Group Limited here in New Zealand. Well, our optimisation team is part of our central portfolio management team, and we're responsible for creating a sales allocation plan and supporting production plans for Fonterra Group here in New Zealand. That covers over 2.5 million tonnes of product a year, supplying into both retail products, food service products and ingredients products, looking after that production through sort of 22 plants across New Zealand with about 76 different types of factories across those plants. I've been with Fonterra for over 30 years, wide-ranging experience, starting off in the product technical area before moving into sales for 10 years, and then into product portfolio management and optimisation. I've been involved in the digital space with the deployment of a optimisation solution for our product mix management using Signal Demand, which is now part of the Pros company, about 8 years ago. Back to you, David.
Well, thank you for being with us for so long, and thank you also for joining us all the way from New Zealand. We really appreciate it. And Phillip, maybe you could introduce yourself. We're very honoured to be a strong partner with Simon Kucher. So maybe a little bit about yourself and a bit about Simon Kucher for those of our audience that are not aware.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for having me. My name is Phillip. I'm a managing partner of Simon Kucher & Partners Houston office. I've been with the firm for 16 years, and I work in our B2B division or vertical, focusing on manufacturing companies, but also on a variety of industries, including chemicals, oil and gas, industrials, B2B services. For those of you who don't know Simon Kucher is a mid-sized consultant company, about 1,400 employees in 39 offices worldwide. Our claim to fame is that we're the #1 pricing consultancy. So we do more pricing projects than the top 5 strategy consulting firms combined in any given year. And apart from pricing, we work on everything that's related to smart top-line growth. So commercial strategies, sales strategies, marketing, and go-to-market strategies as well. We don't work on the cost-cutting side, and we don't work on HR restructuring. So really the sunny side of consulting.
And we'll talk about this more, but clearly more and more companies are now moving away from that cost cutting and into optimization and recovery. So that's great timing to have you, and thank you for joining us, Phillip. And David, by no means last, we're deeply honoured to have you, and we're also very proud of our partnership with Microsoft. So maybe you could tell a little bit more about your role and your responsibilities, and particularly your colourful manufacturing background, starting with spark plugs in Michigan, I believe. So.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you again for having me and for having Microsoft be part of this. So my name is David Bria. I'm part of the global manufacturing team here at Microsoft. It's a team where I have responsibility for working with our strategic customers and with our strategic partners for the Americas time zone. I started working in manufacturing literally 3 days out of high school in Flint, Michigan, making spark plugs. So I've been at it for a while, lived through a lot of the waves of optimization and improvement, but have also worked in the APS companies back in the late 90s when a lot of these supply chains got stood up, in ERP and even a CPQ company in between. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is really Microsoft's commitment to manufacturing. And one point of evidence around that is really a big restructuring that we did here in the US to really organize all of our field teams into one unit focused specifically on manufacturing. And in fact, I'm wearing my brand new shirt to represent that team here on this call. So thanks again for having me.
Well, thank you, David. And I wish my shirt was as new as yours. Unfortunately, it isn't. But maybe, Paul, we could start the real discussion with you. And in preparation for this, you've talked so much about the volatility in supply and demand, and clearly, we are still in the midst of very difficult times. And you talked about agility and speed and predictability. It's just so important to the strength of Fonterra, particularly at the moment. Maybe you could just expand on the challenges that you've had and some of the things that you've done to really get ahead and overcome those challenges.
Yep, David. Yes, definitely. Obviously, this season, this year with COVID hitting the world, we've seen quite significant changes in our demand patterns around the world. I think Fonterra has been fortunate in terms of it has a very diverse customer and product portfolio. We cover sales from the consumer spectrum in terms of products you might find on the supermarket shelf in some countries of the world, through to products you'll find in the restaurant kitchens that you might visit either pre-COVID or now that some of us are allowed back out into the world. As well as to in food manufacturers' warehouses. But what we have seen is obviously during that period, we saw a real slowdown in what we call our food service products, sales to restaurants and commercial kitchens. But a real big significant uplift in sales and consumer products going through supermarkets and direct to homes. Meantime, we've been reasonably lucky in that sales to food manufacturers have stayed reasonably robust across this period. I think that challenge then in terms of that volatility means that we need to have good systems that can look at what is our demand, how's that demand impacting on what we want to do, how can we switch our production from one product to another, where are we at the single point in time. That's in the short-term focus. I think we've also this whole change. I think we're going to see, is the world going to change from what we knew a year ago, and how do trends develop over the coming years? And then that's also a challenge for us as we look forward. We have processes where we're trying to look forward at demand, but really those changes in demand will then drive us to make certain investment decisions around the capital that we need. And surprisingly, we've seen some quite strong increases in some areas of our business, which really are forcing us to have a really good look at where do we invest next. And obviously, when we're doing that, there's a risk associated with that, and we want to make sure that those investments are going to pay for themselves, and we get a decent return on that investment. Even though some countries are looking at negative interest rates, money's still not free for the co-op. Our shareholders, the New Zealand farmers, will be demanding a decent return on their money. Otherwise, they'll want it back to do something else with. We have to look at that demand. We have to make some assessments. Our investment cycles probably good 2 to 3 years out before we can get new capital on the ground and start producing. We're looking in that 3 to 5 to 10 year space to say, well, what is the products that we want to chase? What products are going to be profitable for us? And therefore, can we use our existing machinery and capital, or do we need to invest in new machinery to pursue those opportunities? Those challenges have always been there, but I think, this COVID event has really driven a change in focus there and a change in some of the market dynamics that we've seen, and also the way in which we interact with customers as well. So we will be looking at those systems as well in terms of how we interface with customers compared to what we've done traditionally. Back to you, David.
And thank you so much for that insight, Paul. And David, to that point, just to expand on Paul's point as far as the customers at the heart of this, how Fonterra are going to interact with their customers, and through the 140 different countries and all of these different products and different channels. And you've often talked about, a lot of your customers are really looking, of course, at supply chain optimization, but how important this omnichannel customer experience is to get back into growth mode, recovery mode, and the challenges are not going to go away, but how manufacturers can change their approach to realize that, you know, the optimization that's available. So maybe you could just expand on Paul's comment.
Yeah, I think what Paul described is what we see more broadly across the manufacturing market, right? Fonterra is a pretty diversified company. So in some cases, we're struggling to expand capacity to keep up with demand. If you think about consumer staples, packaging, certain food ingredient makers, their business has exploded. And so it's really a matter of trying to repurpose production, how to move from delivering to stores and cafeterias and schools to doorsteps. And so it creates unique opportunities to look at how to segment that customer base, how to bring in different pricing strategies. A lot of companies are, reevaluating moving from a product transaction-based model to a subscription or even consumption-based. In other situations, they are still operating at like 50% of pre-COVID capacity. And so those are unique opportunities to really rethink the customer experience. We're working with a lot of B2B companies to really get serious and move beyond e-commerce to, new types of ways to emulate what customers expect. And so in those cases, it starts with the customer experience, but it goes backward into the business model to look at SKU realignment, network optimization, all the way back to the supply base, where you don't want to be single sourced, and you may want to rethink the parts of the world that you're sourcing things from, because agility is directly tied to lead time. And so we're having, those discussions with many companies. It's important to start with the market and the customer versus a traditional way where you start with a product or a supplier and move forward.
Yeah, that's a great point, that the customer's at the heart of everything, more so now than ever before. I mean, I've heard expressions of COVID's driven a decade of change in a matter of weeks, and I think that's probably a fair comment. Just before I bring you, Phillip, into the discussion, I just want to remind the audience that we will be taking questions, and I will put those questions to these experts. So please use the icon at the bottom of your screen to put in those questions, and we'll later in the sessions get to those and put those to this panel of experts. So Phillip, just to build on what Paul has said and what David has expanded on, is how important the customer is and how important that visibility, that transparency, facing these unprecedented challenges. And I know as a consultant, you probably say it depends, but if you had that crystal ball and you're able to recommend to manufacturers where they should be really placing their bets to optimize these opportunities that are coming back, what key advice would you have?
Yeah, you're knowing my answer up front. So it actually does depend quite a bit. So I was just thinking through two clients that I was talking to this very week. One is a manufacturer that sells mostly into oil and gas companies. They're dealing with a demand slump of 80%. And dealing with, a fierce competition, everybody beating each other's head in terms of pricing. Another company is mainly working in protective equipment. Their sales went up by over 1,000%, right? And so I think what these both companies have in common, though, is that whatever they do has to be very fast. They have to be very agile in responding to those market conditions, or either they lose out on an opportunity or they're out of the market. And I think that's kind of the common topic. So the way that you go to market has to be more agile. The way that you design products for this new normal, so to say, has to be more agile. The way that you go about cost cutting has to be more agile. You need to be able to take capacity out or bring it back in function of what the demand is doing. And on top of that, there's this added question of what of these changes will prevail after COVID-19. So there's some changes in the way our customers buy their products or consume our products and services that will stick and others will not. And all of that ultimately sums up in agility, right? You have to be able to respond faster which adds to your costs. And that ultimately then again adds to being able to monetize this agility in one way or another. To David's point of exploring new revenue models, there's a lot going on in that space right now. So,
and Paul, frankly, you've been doing a lot of this digital first approach for many years. Maybe you could just expand on this point of now that the customer demands have rapidly changed, the expectations have rapidly changed. People are expecting a consistent experience through different channels. They're expecting a tailored, a personalized experience. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you have driven those changes and those improvements in Fonterra to get ahead of these new requirements, again, in the face of all the volatility that you've all already talked about.
Yeah, Richard, it's been a challenge. I think for us, first of all, though, has been making sure that our planning process, automation of that, bringing that together. And that's been a journey that we've been on for a long time. And it's our ability then to be able to collect our demand information and pull it into a system where we can analyse it and can analyse it quite quickly, and we can see what we need to do. In terms of Fonterra being an agricultural-based company, we have quite a seasonality to what we do. And so we're looking both, one of our key focuses is looking at what we do over the season and making decisions around what we make now for sale in the future for the season, and then alternatively is looking out further for that period. So being able to put in an optimization model for our supply side has been vitally important, and it means it's allowed us to bring in all the various pieces of information in terms of our revenue forecasts, our demand volume forecasts, where we're going to sell it and who we want to sell to. And it has allowed us to then re-optimize that at least twice a month at a high level from a monthly level, and then down further as we move into the actual what are we going to make tomorrow in terms of our weekly and daily processes. So bringing that into place has brought a lot more agility than what we used to have when it was a lot more manual process that took over a month to do every time. And also, given that our supply chains are quite long, we do have to make some quite, the faster we can make those decisions, the better, because it starts to take some weeks out of those supply chains. We're not perfect, and we're continuing on that journey. We're starting to look at, well, how do we start to introduce more digital interfaces, especially with our B2B customers, and because that's the majority of our business, dealing with other businesses, whether it's supplying them with consumer, food service or ingredient products. And we're having a look at that to say, how do we have I think we mentioned before, sort of potentially omnichannels. How do we have put that information in front of customers compared to how we used to do it one-on-one? Yeah.
Paul, I have a question. Apart
please,
from
Phillip.
Your traditional business is going up and down due to the effects of COVID. Have you been able to use technology to also identify completely white spots, completely new fields that you didn't explore previously?
My answer to that probably, yes and no. A lot of, I think, we're still using quite traditional methods in terms of the relationships that we have with our customers, in terms of very relationship driven, in terms of account management models. And, we have seen business opportunities arrive from some of our customers, especially the customers that deal more in the medical space, who are looking for ingredients, especially for feeding patients after they've either, whether it's COVID driven or whatever. So that of those opportunities have arisen, and we were asked to respond very fast with some of those ingredients. And so, but like your example of protective equipment, seeing demand, double, triple, quadruple, and how do we respond quickly to that? And that was probably through exception management processes that we had to do that. Haven't really seen in terms of, I suppose, say data mining and that to identify other new product areas at this point. It's still more that traditional method of going out there and talking to our customer base.
So, David, it's kind of ironic that you work for Microsoft, and we often cite that manual processes driven by spreadsheets are probably part of the problem and part of the challenge. But you often talk about how your customers have successfully implementing these new digital first processes with the customer at the heart. And Paul talked a lot about omnichannel and how important that is. And maybe you could just talk a little bit more about that omnichannel approach and what you've seen customers and the bets that they're placing from a technology perspective of how they're moving the needle and improving that omnichannel experience, which we all agree is just so important moving forward.
Yeah, I think it goes to the underlying, process design across value chains. A lot of companies still operate with, 3-letter enterprise applications that have been stitched together. It's resulted in kind of a monolithic approach to how you run your business. When you go walk the actual end-to-end process flow, too often the points of latency and lack of the right data results in people using spreadsheets. So even though it's hurt our Excel business, it does create an opportunity to really rethink a new architecture. We think there's a next generation architecture where you can take existing data, pull it together in an aggregate way, and then over time be able to go after different points of opportunity while you're building to a new structure, right? A new operating model that's a lot more real time, and as you move forward, becomes more predictive. There's actually 2 good examples of that. One is our own devices supply chain. So we saw very early on what was happening over in Asia, because that's where a lot of our suppliers and production base is. So one of the early decisions we made was to close all of our physical stores, move to a full online presence, but not get rid of any of the employees in the stores. So they all had to figure out how to still deliver on that customer experience while not being present. The other supply chain that we operate is around our own data centers. So if you can just imagine Teams usage alone and what that's created in terms of capacity, opportunities for us to expand that business, it's created kind of another unique way that we can really deliver on those differentiated customer expectations, right? Nobody knew that they would be working from home with their kids in the next room, taking school lessons from home as well. So I think in terms of omnichannel, it's here to stay. People expect personalization. They're going to expect new products faster, and they're going to expect that at much different lot sizes or order quantities than what a lot of manufacturing companies are set up to deliver now.
And Phillip, to expand on that, and thank you, David, because that's wonderful insight. And I think clearly you have to be ahead of the curve. You have to deliver that and exceed those omnichannel customer expectations. But of course, Phillip, at the heart of it, that you would argue is giving the right value, the right price, because that has a huge effect on potential margin optimization. So maybe you could comment and kind of connect it all together from that viewpoint, because you work across so many different segments within manufacturing of where those manufacturers should really look at to optimize that value or that price that has such a big effect on things.
Yeah, well, it starts with the fact that even before moving into omni-channel, many manufacturers struggle with actually getting something like a systematic and structured pricing strategy in the market. Problem is, the moment that you move to omni-channel and you move into a much more transparent world, all these problems multiply. I recall one of our clients, manufacturer of equipment, they said, well, our goal is grow omni-channel, grow online sales by X%, without qualifying why they wanted to grow, but that's a different story. But ultimately, in order to being able to sell their products online, they had to come up with a common price point across segments, which by itself didn't make much sense. But then also it led to a price reduction. Now, they were willing to bite into that apple and said, well, let's go ahead and invest in the future, which is online. The problem was that they never consulted their colleagues in Canada. So the Canada market essentially, they killed that by about 20% due to the policies that they installed in the US. So the moral of that story is that if you move to an omni-channel world, you have to do your homework up front. You need to define, your overall strategy, what you're trying to accomplish. If you never really worked on pricing optimization, that's probably the work that you want to do up front. And then the data piece that David mentioned, and the software piece that comes on, that comes as well. You need that, but you need to have the strategy in the first place to make sure you're not losing money with it. So it's not a self-fulfilling goal to be omnichannel, right? You have to define why are you going omnichannel and kind of where you're actually getting the money from.
And Paul, I'd like to get to some audience questions in just a few minutes, but maybe you could again share some of your experience in the implementation of what David and Phillip have so eloquently described. Of yes, omnichannel is important, the customer experience is important, offering the right value is important, but you've brought it all together. And as Fonterra, you've been able to do that with such diverse segments, those 140 different countries, the 30 times variability in supply and demand. Sometimes it's how have you really driven that approach that both David and Phillip have described?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a journey, Richard, and really to do that, you start to need to understand your data sources, your data. You've got to put robust processes in place to be reviewing that. And we're still on that journey in terms of, just as Phillip was mentioning, we're looking at this whole digital side of it in terms of how do we interact with our customers now and getting that right. So going back to that planning process, though, and dealing with those 140 countries plus and all the various products that we have, it's really making sure that your data is right and that your data architecture is right and it flows through. We still have a few Excel spreadsheets hiding around the place still, but and we'll continue on that journey, I think. And what we're finding as we go and start looking at how do we have more of a digital presence in front of our customers, just as all of us here can purchase everything online and stay at home. We want to start providing that to our customers now. We need to do that in an agile way. And I think the key learning for a lot of us is what that means is we've got to, there's going to be mistakes along the way, and we have to learn from those mistakes compared to really, projects I've been involved with in the past where it was a lot more waterfall and you designed everything up front and it was, people had a lot more certainty, even though sometimes you baked in quite big mistakes when you went that way and sometimes it was hard to fix them. So we have to embrace that more agile approach and move the business that way. But I think we're still, underlying that, you need some quite robust processes and a good understanding of your business to support the agility as we move forward.
Wonderful. So I'd like to change gears and get some questions from the audience. So let's change focus, and I'd like to start with a question from the audience.